As the conflict in the Middle East escalates, Gulf nations are seeking new defense partnerships. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have signed deals with Ukraine to gain access to its drone expertise. Could other countries follow suit? And will it make a difference on the ground? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. Gulf countries have been bombarded by Iranian missiles and drones since the war began a month ago. They've used advanced air defense systems to counter the attacks, but these interceptor missiles are costly and they take time to manufacture. Ukraine, under near daily attack from Russia, has spent 4 years perfecting interceptor drones that can be produced quickly and cheaply. And some Gulf nations are now asking Ukraine to share its expertise. Saudi Arabia and Qatar have already signed defense agreements. If others reach similar deals, what could they offer Ukraine in return? And how beneficial are Ukrainian drones to Gulf countries under attack from Iran? We'll talk to our guests in just a moment. But first, a report from Imogen Kimber.
Drones. A vital part of Ukraine's arsenal in its ongoing war with Russia. The drones intercept projectiles.
Basically, the military can see on the radar the Shahed drone, then they put out the P-1 Sun drone and deploy it right to the target. It can go with the speed up to 310 kilometers per hour, with the 17 minutes in the air and 35 kilometers range.
Each one costs less than $1,000. Which is cheap for air defences. The interceptor missiles used in the US Patriot system, and the manufacturer says they work. This particular interceptor has downed more than 2,500 drones in the past 4 months.
So the P-1 Sun interceptor is a fail-safe drone, to be honest. The percentage of successful rate is roughly 80%. It's really easy to operate.
Designers are confident someone can be trained to use them in 3 weeks. And soon, Ukraine could be exporting drones like these, and the accompanying technology and expertise. During the war with the US and Israel, Iran has been launching missiles and drones at military bases, energy facilities, and civilian infrastructure in the Gulf. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has seen an opportunity and visited the Middle East this week. He signed an agreement on defense cooperation with Saudi Arabia.
Our experience is very important. Russia is definitely helping Iran. Ukraine provides countries with expert guidance on protecting civilian infrastructure and, above all, people.
Zelensky is also visiting Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. With US firepower and resources directed at Iran, there are fears funding may be diverted away from the war in Ukraine. So exporting low-cost defences could provide Kyiv with additional funds and possibly more advanced weapon systems in exchange. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. Here with me in the studio is Dania Thafer. She's the Executive Director of the Gulf International Forum, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. Joining us from Kiev is Oleksiy Melnyk, who's the co-director of the Razumkov Center, a Ukrainian public policy research institute. And from Moscow, Pavel Felgenhar, a defense and Russian foreign policy analyst. A warm welcome to you all. Pavel, let's start with you. Russia has invested years building ties with Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf. So how damaging is this Ukraine, Saudi, Qatar defense deal as far as Moscow's influence is concerned?
Well, this is really a serious problem. Because of, for Russia, after the beginning, especially when the active phase of the war with Ukraine began in 22, severe sanctions were imposed by the West. The Gulf states become a very important outlet for Russia in terms of business, trade. Lots of things are going through Gulf states, and they, of course, didn't impose any sanctions, and there are personal ties with the leadership in the Kremlin. And so when now there's a very good visit to the Gulf by the Ukrainian president Vladimir Zelensky, who Russia does not like at all, and he goes to Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, now Qatar, and apparently also has not simply trade deals, but defense deals. And Ukraine turns out to have influence in the Gulf and in the Arab world it never had. That's seen as a very serious problem. In the beginning of this conflict with the Iranian war, there was the Ukrainians offered to supply anti-drone technology to the Americans. They were rebuffed publicly by President Trump, who said that American technology is the best and he doesn't need it, which was seen very good in Moscow. And now the kind of our Arab friends turn their back on us and go to Ukraine, and that's seen as a very serious problem.
Oleksiy, you've warned that there are more risks to Ukraine than benefits from the Middle East conflict. What worries you most right now?
First of all, it's a distraction of international attention from the Russian-Ukrainian war. International attention in general and of the Donald Trump's administration, which pretends to play the main role as a mediator in the conflict resolution. And secondly, it's a general energy, global energy crisis and the global competition for very essential items like air defense missiles. Because the United States of America is the major supplier of the PAC-3 missiles for Patriot systems, which are able to intercept Russian ballistic missiles. So this is about the risks, and also as every crisis provides opportunities for Ukraine as well.
Dania, the Gulf states have long relied on Western defense systems. Is this deal really about plugging a capability gap, given that traditional systems that Oleksiy was talking about there, the Patriot missiles, are extremely expensive to use against relatively low-cost drones? Or are we seeing perhaps the beginning of a broader shift here, where Gulf states need to diversify security partnerships beyond the US and its allies?
I think what we're seeing is that the Gulf states are diversifying in certain areas where they couldn't get the technology from the US. This is also a response to the diminishing capacity of Iran's missile arsenal. And now they have a huge inventory of drones. And I guess that's also a reflection of Trump's war strategy of being able to diminish the missile capacity of Iran, yet has not been able to address the drone problem. Now, does this mean that it's going to replace the American system? I think not. Even the Ukrainian system itself also depends on the American system, but I think they both address different core strategies and issues. The missile defense system works well with ballistic missiles and other types of missiles, whereas this anti-drone system is focusing on the drones. So it's not a replacement for US technology. I think it's just helping to diversify the strategy of the Gulf states.
Pavel, you said that this is very unpleasant for Moscow. How much leverage does Russia actually still have in the Gulf today?
Well, that's also a problem that since the war with Ukraine began, Russian influence has waned in the Middle East. And after the fall of the Assad regime in Damascus, even more so. Many in Moscow right now are actually in the government and near government are rooting for the Iranians in this war because many in Russia don't like the United States and they would want to see them humiliated. Though officially Russia is keeping kind of trying to be more neutral, the Kremlin, and of course it's very much noticed that when there was a resolution passed by the UN Security Council deploring Iranian attacks on Arab Gulf states, Russia didn't like it. They officially issued a statement, this is a very bad, unbalanced resolution, but didn't veto it. Russia abstained together with China. So that shows how important the Gulf states are. And so Russia right now, I think there's going to be unpleasantness, but Russia will not right now try to kind of get really more pro-Iranian visibly, or try to sanction the Gulf states, or I think Moscow is going to kind of swallow up there. It won't really do anything, but there's going to be a lot of resentment.
Oleksiy, for Ukraine, this is a quid pro quo deal. It's trading expertise for weapons, particularly systems like the expensive Patriot missiles that you were talking about earlier. What about in the long term, though? What is it looking to gain from this arrangement with the Gulf?
First of all, let me say that I agree with our guest that the Ukrainian systems is not a supplement. I mean, it's not a replacement, it's a supplement, because it's a cheap stuff to shut down relatively cheap drones. And if we talk about the long-term cooperation, or what Ukraine actually offers now, it's not just these small drones, no matter how sophisticated, technologically advanced they are. It's the whole system. And it's also training, because 200 Ukrainian specialists that are there, they can immediately use these drones, because even if it looks simple, it takes weeks and probably months to train operators to use the drones. And it's not just about individual skills, it's also the whole system that allows to detect Shahed drones, allows to intercept them, and Ukraine also has command and control systems that provide situational awareness for every operator. So every operator can see not only the target, but also the whole picture of the, let's say, 100 kilometers. So which makes the job much easier to detect and to divide the areas of responsibilities.
Dania, what does this tell us about the future of warfare in the Gulf region in particular, where relatively cheap drones can challenge some of the most advanced air systems in the world, not to say expensive systems too?
You know, I don't think in the grand scheme of things it's going to change the equation from a major perspective. But what I think it's a much more cost-effective approach to address the missiles coming from Iran, because the interceptors cost, let's say, 1 million every time they intercept a missile, whereas this costs a couple of $1,000s. So it's definitely an alternative for this particular issue, the drone issue. Sure, it's going to take a long time to be able to integrate the knowledge base in the Gulf's military infrastructure to use this technology. But I also think that this is not necessarily, like I mentioned before, an alternative to the U.S. system. The basing infrastructure in the U.S. is integrated, and the training to that system has been integrated in the Gulf over a course of many years and billions and billions and billions of dollars. So it's not a replacement, I say, and I don't think it's going to change the equation by that much.
Pavel, could Russia try to disrupt or discourage this kind of cooperation politically, economically, even covertly? Would it be interested in doing that?
I think for Russia right now to get on the wrong side of Trump by supplying, say, Iran with additional weapons was not a very good idea, and to get on the wrong side of the Gulf states either. So Russia right now is in a position where it can kind of resent, but most likely does not have much ways of actually acting against that. Uh, so this is kind of we're stuck really right now there, and not can't do nothing real much to influence the situation. And this gives Ukraine additional international points in very important area in the Gulf, and maybe they'll be able to sell that technology to other places where there's a drone threat. Of course, there are other things coming up internationally in the kind of arms market, like laser systems that may actually be even more effective and even more cheaper to take down drones, and not only drones. But for the time being, the Ukrainians have developed an effective system kind of in the garage, and it works. And right now, it's going to be. It's bad for Iran. It's also bad for Russia more strategically. But Russia will try to be seen not really getting involved into this conflict.
Oleksiy, feel free to come back on that. Can Ukraine sustain both a war at home and a growing security role abroad? Is it strengthening its position globally, or overstretching itself at a critical moment in its own war?
A lot of my colleagues and politicians have been talking about already about the Third World War, and I do support this idea. This is not, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and now we have this conflict in the Middle East. It's probably you cannot separate these two conflicts. That's part of one broader global conflict, and by providing assistance to the Gulf states nowadays, I think Ukraine also contributes not just to regional global security, but also contributes to strengthening its own security. We don't have spare men, but 200. We sent 200 highly skilled, trained specialists. And I think this is this kind of risks that it was worth to take. And also, if we think in the longer term, that Ukraine and Saudi Arabia can offer each other a lot on both the diplomatic front, financial cooperation, and energy cooperation. So it maybe some risks nowadays, but it can pay back much more in the future.
Dania, the Gulf has long walked a fine diplomatic line. It's almost that many of the Gulf nations want to be friends with everybody, or at least have good relations with a lot of countries. How does this fit into the Gulf's wider strategy of balancing relationships with the likes of Russia, with China, with the US, Ukraine too? How sensitive are these new relationships that it's trying to build right now? Politically, given especially Qatar's attempts to manage tension with Iran, whilst also defending itself against Iran's drones?
Well, I think this in general places the Gulf more Western aligned than they are, for example, with the Russians. And, the Gulf states had different postures when it came to Russia. You had the UAE and Saudi, sometimes align a little bit towards Russia, not necessarily against the West, but you've always seen Qatar kind of be consistently aligned with the West. So the other thing to point out is that Russia benefited from this conflict because it was able to put some of its energy resources online. So financially, it benefited from this. And I wouldn't say that Russia is completely neutral. I say Russia didn't put all of its weight into this conflict on Iran's side, but they did help Iran when it came to intelligence. I also would like to say that Iran getting itself involved in areas out of its core strategic goals was really part of the failure of Iran, because it exposed their vulnerabilities with their drones in Ukraine, because there was an opportunity to study their drones and now bring it to the Gulf. Also, it getting involved in Syria's Hezbollah was the fall of Hezbollah in Lebanon, arguably. And therefore, I think Iran is probably learning a valuable lesson of not overreaching itself and causing alignment against Iranian interests in the Gulf, which I do think that the U.S. provides the security here still in the Gulf in terms of equipment. It's the main provider. And the Ukrainians are now a second layer. And then you have the Europeans involved as well in defense posture. So it just seems like we're leaning towards more of a Western alignment.
Pavel, Moscow says these deals with Saudi Arabia and Qatar are unacceptable. Riyadh calls it necessary. Kyiv calls it a survival strategy. Who's right? And if Ukraine becomes a security partner in the Gulf, does that fundamentally change the geopolitical map, do you think?
Well, in the Gulf, to some extent, yes, because Ukraine didn't have any influence in the Middle East whatsoever before this latest war and the breakthrough of them going on to the arms market, actually, the lucrative arms market of the Gulf states. And now they do have an influence. They do have a say at the table, and the spectacular visit of President Zelensky to the Gulf is a demonstration of that. Great annoyance in Moscow, nothing really immediately they can do, but there's going to be words said. But the Gulf states are so essential as a Russian outlet to the world economically and financially. That means that Russia will not kind of do anything rash to break off relations with the Gulf states because they're trading with Ukraine. But this does not really change the essentials of what's happening on the front line in the Ukrainian war. There are developments happening there, also important, but they are not directly connected that much. They are connected, but not absolutely with what's happening in the Gulf. Yes, this may be a beginning of some kind of possible World War III, but it's not that these conflicts are actually merging into one big war. They're still separated, which is very good.
Oleksiy, feel free to come back on that. Is Ukraine positioning itself, not just as a country at war itself, but as a global security provider?
I don't think that Ukraine has such ambitions. And also, if we talk about possible replacement of Russia by Ukraine, Ukraine is not simply capable to offer as much as Russia. But definitely, Ukraine has a middle-sized country, has the role to play as a security provider. And there is more and more understanding in Europe, especially with the current shifts in American priorities, that Ukraine is not a consumer. Ukraine is a contributor of security. So if Ukraine is perceived as a contributor to security and the front line defending Europe, so Ukraine has a lot to offer for the Gulf states and in other parts of the world.
Dania, to what extent should no one be surprised by these deals that are being done with Ukraine, that it's just precisely the kind of pragmatic, issue-based cooperation that defines how Gulf states operate in the modern age?
Well, right now, the Gulf states are in an emergency state trying to secure and defend themselves under in the pretext of war that they didn't even start, and they're at the front lines of it. And therefore, I think right now, I don't think we should consider it as complete realignment. I think that reflection hasn't happened yet. Right now, it's just about addressing the core security needs of the different Gulf states. Ukraine clearly had the technology that the Gulf states needed, and the Gulf states definitely have the resources to get that technology. And I think that's where it is right now.
Let's ask Pavel. Maybe the final question. I don't know. We're almost out of time here. But does this kind of cooperation, do you think, make the Gulf region more secure, or does it risk drawing in more external players in an already volatile situation?
Well, the possibility of an escalation and bringing in more players, escalation of the conflict is very real. There was a reported, apparently, attack from Yemen against Israel. This means that the Yemenis, Houthis that have been out of the conflict may join in. This will be a major escalation of the conflict. There's a lot of possibility of escalation. The Ukrainian presence there, I don't think that that's really adding anything significant to that. But the escalation possibility is very much there and very dangerous.
All right. Oleksiy, do you agree with that? Does bringing Ukraine into Gulf security dynamics risk drawing the region further into perhaps the wider confrontation involving Russia and the West?
So far, Ukraine hasn't declared any intention to take part in the combat operation against Iranian regime, despite there are plenty of reasons for Ukraine to consider Iran as an aggressor state, as the state that supported Russian aggression. And I don't think that this particular participation, I mean, it's simply defensive actions and protecting not troops, but critical civilian infrastructure. So I don't think that it's raising any additional risk for Ukraine. But when we talk about what Ukraine can also, what kind of interest could be the Gulf states towards Ukraine, let me remind you that even in a time of war, Ukraine is still one of the biggest global supplier of agriculture products. So this is there are many other areas of cooperation in addition to technical military cooperation.
There, we must end it. Many thanks indeed, Dania Thafer, Oleksiy Melnyk, and Pavel Felgenhauer. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again at any time by going to the website. You'll find that at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation at any time on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here, we'll say bye-bye for now. Al Jazeera's coverage of the war continues in just a moment.